the 2008 financial crisis was just a monumental earthquake. And much of that was because the banks owed each other a bunch of money. And if one goes down, it can't pay, Lehman can't pay Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo can't pay Bank of America. Bank of America can't pay Goldman. I mean,
it just cascades.
It just cascades. And that's the contagion component of it that the Fed steps in and tries to prevent. And I'm for bailouts. I think, certainly following the 08 financial crisis, it's good to not have the complete and total implosion of the banking sector overall. The problem is we should have never let it get to the point where you have banks that are too big to fail. If they're too big to fail, there's only one option, right? I mean, they succeed, right? And if that's the case, then they're basically PG&E, right? They need to be either totally made public or really highly regulated, not allow them to have more than, 6% rate of return. If they want to go be an investment bank without any sort of, basically a hedge fund without any sort of government backstop, fine, go do that. But if we're going to guarantee that you're not going to fail, then you guys shouldn't be able to make the astronomical sums of money that you make, because there's only upside, right? There's no downside.
That's one of the counters to what I've heard with the buyouts, is that in doing this, we're just showing the banks, hey, you can go take people's money and play this very risky game and take even riskier chances because you're still going to come out on top.
Yeah.
You're still going to be able to cash out and the deposits are going to be covered and no skin off your back.
Yeah. And so it's, again, this is the kind of balancing act because, well, there are a few things. Because bailouts are important in the time that you're having a crisis. You got to calm everything down. You don't want, because you can force good banks to become not good banks really, really quickly, right? So, a bank, and this is why I say when in the 08 financial crisis, there were a lot of banks that were not yet insolvent. Like Wells Fargo is always championed as this great example of being a safe bank during the 08 financial crisis, leaving aside that they've done a bunch of criminal activity since. But they weren't insolvent at the time of the bailouts. They protested. They said, because the Fed required banks to take a bunch of money, including Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo said, we don't need this TARP money, the Troubled Asset Relief Program money. We don't need, the however many billions of dollars it was. We're in good shape. Fed said, no, you're taking this. We don't want anyone thinking that you're good and which means that everyone else is bad. So there's let's calm the markets mentality. But it would have been the case if they didn't create all of that bailout money. We saw what happened when one bank failed. Well, then imagine if Goldman goes next and then JP Morgan goes next and then Chase goes next. And then it would have gotten to Wells Fargo because they're holding a bunch of assets that are either, people are going to become scared of, and they're not going to be able to sell them at a normal value, at par value is kind of the term that people use. That just means the exact, initial value of the asset. But then they're also, JP Morgan, Goldman surely owed Wells Fargo money. So if Goldman fails, all of a sudden those assets that were supposed to be paid to Wells Fargo, the assets that Wells Fargo's holding, those don't get paid. Well, then you have, the equity of Wells Fargo just disappear.
It's almost like you couldn't get out. It was going to touch you eventually.
Yeah.
It just was how far down the chain you
sitting. Totally. And so the I hate saying that the bailout is a good thing because none of us get bailed out, right? I mean, if I lose my job, the government's not stepping in and saying, "Oh, well,
We got your
we
back.
got your back here. You can stay in your house and keep paying your car payment and whatnot." Um, but the bailout in '08 was absolutely necessary to just keep the thing afloat. But then what we should have done was throw probably 10,000 people in prison